Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, Spencer Stewart, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member, along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources and the co-founder and editor-at-large of Corporate Board Member. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the show, and we're filming here in New York at the Conference Board Studios. And we have a great topic today and a great guest. Our topic today is board leadership. Where do we go from here? And joining me is somebody that through his career has had chances to experience a lot of leadership. And welcome Brad Oates, who's a board member with CIT Groups and CIT Bank. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you, TK. It's a privilege to be here.
So the first thing I want to talk about is my experience is that every board handles board leadership different because there is no formal definition of it. Okay, yes, we have a lead director. Yes, if the CEO isn't also chairman, there is an outside chairman of the board. In the old days, that was picked by who had the longest tenure or who had the time to do it. Today, we know that board leadership plays a very important role. In the best cases, a CEO has a great relationship with the board. They're working together, sort of single vision. They challenge the CEO, but in a way that's very constructive. You know what the definition of the good board is. And the worst case is the group is not, quote, self-governing themselves at all. You've got trying to do things by committee. There's no one sort of organizing all the important stuff that has to happen. You know, who's going to chair the board committees? Do we have the right people in the room? You know, when do we have to, self-report things if we find problems? I mean, obviously the board has a lot of responsibility in that sense. So my question to you is, first of all, how do you see, from your experience, the best boards handling board leadership? And then a follow-up question to that is, what happens if you get on a board and you find out that you're the new board member, but there really isn't good leadership? So it's a two-part question.
Well, it's a great question, and I think it strikes at the heart of effective board leadership, effective boards. Without an effective board, I don't think you have an effective company. So I'd step back and say, what is the definition of leadership? The way I look at leadership, one way to think about it is not just getting people to follow you, but getting people to want to follow you. And that takes somebody that has respect and can earn the respect. I'd also say that I think of board leadership in two dimensions. One would be individual board leadership. I think while a individual director may or may not be, say, a lead director or the chairperson, they still have to be a leader on the board in their own right in many ways. They need to be well prepared. They need to be independent. I mean, you think about the balance it takes for an individual board. Independent but collaborative, agreeable but being able to be firm when you advocate a position. Be a strategic thinker but a tactical understanding. And then I think there is the idea of board leadership collectively as a body. There's no question that if there isn't a designated leader on the board, a lead director or chairman, I think you end up with a weaker board. I think this comes back to accountability. A lot of times, I think some boards may be reluctant to want to elevate somebody to a position of superiority in the board. It's really not a matter of superiority, but having somebody that everyone would respect, that can set the agenda, organize the meeting, and can resolve the friction that both may occur within the board as well as between board and management.
in our careers, we've both seen plenty of examples where somebody may not be the captain or somebody may not be the chairman or whatever, but when they speak, everybody listens, okay? So my point about leadership can come from a lot of places. There are people, as you just described, that may not want the official title, but that play a huge role in both setting the culture and providing guidance to a board. Is that your experience as well?
Yes, I mean, you and I both come out of sports backgrounds, and you know, my experience with championship teams, my years playing in the NFL, you know, helped me understand what is the DNA that creates a championship team that is similar to a championship board. And we had a saying, if you want to fix losing, fix the locker room. And that's just another analogy for fix the boardroom when there's not structure and when there is not captains, if you will, of your team that people respect. Gets back to this idea of self-governance. I think boards collectively probably should exemplify what self-governance really means. Come together and appoint among themselves a leader they respect, that they will not necessarily defer to for all decisions, but one that can help organize and keep the agendas moving forward and get things done. And one particularly, I would say, that can think in terms of striking the right balance between competing stakeholder interests. That to me seems like one of the hardest jobs for a board is how do you strike the right balance between competing stakeholder interests?
Explain to our audience what you mean by the stakeholder.
Yeah, so any organization besides owners and investors, employees, customers, there are at least three other stakeholders that I would put on the table for consideration, including third-party business partners, as well as regulatory authorities and the community at large. And trying to strike the right long-term balance for sustainable competitive advantage for an organization requires trade-offs in how you balance those competing interests. Whether it's maximizing shareholder value at the expense of cutting employees and continued turnover, long-term I think that can have a detrimental effect if you get out of balance in any one of those stakeholder relationships. That to me is the hardest thing for a board to do, is find the right balance against cycles and against the business model that the company has.
Great advice. So I'm going to press you on this issue of if you were a new director and you came in and you noticed that there was just a general lack of this leadership or whatever, what should a new director do in that scenario?
Well, I first start with what a new director should not do. I think you should never point out a problem that you don't also have a solution in mind. So while that may be a problem as a new director, I might come in an executive session and say, I believe that we would be more effective if we have an organized structure with a designated lead director who would do these things, and then outline it. And make a suggestion. I suggest as a recommendation for our consideration that here's how we go about as a self-governing body to appoint one among us who we can respect, who will set the agenda. And this lead director does not mean their views are more valuable than any one of ours, but it's somebody that we will all collectively agree to that will be at least to monitor and help avoid the friction that might otherwise occur. There's got to be a referee, if you will, in the game. And sometimes the lead director or the designated chairperson has to play that role.
It seems like everything we talk about sort of gets back to self-govern and accountability. Isn't that interesting how that always works?
It is, and I guess with our sports backgrounds, it resonates as a language that I speak because it's the DNA of championship teams. And I think the same championship principles apply whether it's in the boardroom or on a football field.
or on a military battlefield.
Or nonprofit, or government organization, or even academic institution. Fundamentally the same principles of leadership and self-governance.
So let me ask you this question. I'm sure you're familiar with PwC's annual corporate director survey, and there was a lot of publicity this year again because 45% of the corporate directors they survey, and their survey group is about 1,000, said that there was at least one fellow director that should be replaced. Now, historically, boards have had a challenge with getting the right people in the boardroom. And when I say that, I mean it's very difficult to approach in a collegial atmosphere somebody and say we don't think your skill set fits where this company is going, or for whatever reason maybe they aren't coming to meetings. That makes it a lot easier to have that meeting. It's the one where you have to change your skill sets that I think is the toughest conversation to have. But why aren't, and does this get back to the accountability and the self-governing, why aren't boards better than that? Why do we see this number just skyrocketing in the amount of corporate directors? And this is only the people that would admit it. So if they're admitting it, I still think there's many more that aren't admitting that there's somebody on their board. So what gives? Where do we improve this so that this number just doesn't keep rising?
Well, the metrics show there's a governance gap and disconnect. So we should be honest with ourselves that as public boards, we have not embraced accountability to the same degree among ourselves as we would expect from management. Performance driven. Now, I recognize that this idea of peer reviews, there probably has been handled badly with some organizations, and they're reluctant to go down that path. But that's more having implemented perhaps the wrong peer review process than actually doing peer reviews, meaning the idea of a peer review and accountability is a good thing. Even if it's not to exit a director who is underperforming, just raising the bar among individual director performance is a good thing. And the bar's clearly been raised. The shareholders have raised it. It is literally a full-time job. I mean, it's not just when you're in the boardroom. Probably most of the work is done even outside of the boardroom for effective governance. I think we have a ways to go in embracing accountability and doing constructive peer reviews in which we raise the level of effectiveness in our boardrooms.
Well, Brad, I wanted to, first of all, great advice. I'm sure it will help our audience reflect on how their own situation is being handled today. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us to talk a little bit about board leadership, and I appreciate you joining us here.
Thank you, TK. It's caused me to think more deeply about my own governance effectiveness and how I can be a better board member, and I hope that's the takeaway here.
Well, we'll keep pushing for that proper tone at the top. So,
thank you.
That will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms, brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, Spencer Stewart, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member, along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.